Welcome to the Dred Scott Decision, a study guide. Dred Scott was a slave born in Virginia and owned by Peter Blow. Over time, Blow moved to Alabama and eventually to St. Louis, Missouri. 2 years after moving to Missouri, Peter Blow died in 1832, and Scott was purchased by an Army surgeon named Dr. John Emerson. Dr. Emerson was transferred to Illinois, a free state. After a couple years, Emerson was again transferred to a fort in the Wisconsin Territory, which was also slavery-free. While living in Wisconsin, Scott met and married his wife, Harriet, whose ownership shifted to Dr. Emerson. Eventually, Emerson was once again transferred, this time to Louisiana, where he also married. Unfortunately, Emerson died in 1843. Mrs. Emerson moved to St. Louis, Missouri, where she hired Scott out to an Army captain and Harriet and the children's each out to a different family. Scott was very unhappy with the situation and tried to buy the freedom of his family from Mrs. Emerson, but she refused. Scott then decided to go to court to ask for his freedom, since he had lived in a free territory for several years. His case was heard in the Missouri Circuit Court in 1847, but he lost on a technicality. However, the following year, the Missouri Supreme Court decided Scott's case should be reheard. In 1840, the Missouri Circuit Court declared Scott and his family free. But once again, the Missouri Supreme Court stepped in, overturned that decision, and the Scotts were again slaves. Scott and his lawyers then brought his case to a federal court, but in 1854 they upheld the decision of the Missouri Supreme Court. Scott was left with no choice but to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. The case was called Dred Scott v. Sanford. Sanford was Mrs. Emerson's brother. The U.S. Supreme Court was under the leadership of Chief Justice Roger Taney, a Southerner, and of the 9 justices, 7 were appointed by pro-slavery presidents and 5 were from slave-owning families, which gave the court a Southern majority. The majority opinion for the case was written by Roger Taney and went far beyond upholding or denying the freedom of a single slave family. The court's decision declared, slaves were not citizens, so could not file lawsuits. Slaves were property and therefore had no rights. They also stated that Congress could not pass laws to outlaw slavery in any territory, and that it was up to individual states to decide whether to be free or slave states, in other words, popular sovereignty. With their decision, the court nullified the Missouri Compromise, making it unconstitutional, and they effectively declared slavery legal in every state and territory in the United States. As you can imagine, this decision pleased the South, but outraged many in the North. After the ruling, Mrs. Emerson remarried a man who did not agree with slavery. She returned Scott and his family to Peter Blow's children, who had grown up with Scott. The Blow children gave Scott, Harriet, and their children their freedom. Sadly, Dred Scott died 9 months later, but at least he died a free man. Upset over the Dred Scott decision, abolitionist members of the Democrat, Whig, and Free Soil parties met in Ripon, Wisconsin on March 20, 1854, and created a new political party dedicated to ending slavery, no longer just keeping it from spreading, but ending it. The Republican Party was formed. And now you know a little about Dred Scott and the Dred Scott decision.